Renouncing your US citizenship might be the most freeing or the most complicated decision you'll ever make. Let's talk about what it really involves. I'm Nathalie Goldstein, CEO of MyExpatTaxes and an enrolled agent, and let's go through what you really need to know before you make the leap. In this video, we'll be going over the process of renouncing US citizenship, the tax implications such as the exit tax, filing obligations before and after renouncing, what you lose when you renounce. The process of renouncing US citizenship is generally to go to your local embassy or consulate and essentially request an appointment to give up your US citizenship. This process will cost more than $2,000. It changes every single year, and there normally is a set fee worldwide, but it's a little over $2,000. You'll have to go to your local consulate. You'll have to be there and essentially certify that, yes, you're making this out of your own free will. You have another citizenship because you shouldn't be a person without any citizenship. And then that you've also been tax compliant. And that's probably the trickiest part for a lot of US citizens, since it is pretty common that US taxes following you worldwide is a reason that US citizens tend to give up their US passport. So once you've certified that you meet these requirements, you basically would go to the consulate, you would have your social security number, your US passport, and then you would go ahead and, renounce your US citizenship, essentially taking an oath and say, yes, I renounce. And then following that, you'll normally get a certification of loss of nationality. So when you're thinking about giving up US citizenship, this can be a really tricky situation. We definitely advise to look into it, plan a little bit. We do have a new planning tool with MyExpatTaxes where you can actually see what happens when you give up US citizenship, the steps you have to take, and what happens afterwards. So be sure to check out that planning tool, and let's talk about the dreaded part of giving up US citizenship, the exit tax. So if you're a US citizen and you give up US citizenship and say you were not actually compliant for your last 5 years of tax returns, so you haven't been filing those last 5 years, or you have over $2 million net worth, or you have a very high average tax liability for the last 5 years, so over 100K, it can end up that you are a covered expatriate. A covered expatriate is someone that is subject to US exit tax. And it is what it sounds, that as you exit the US, so you exit being a US citizen, you will owe tax on your current assets. So the exit tax is essentially you selling everything that you own and seeing how much capital gains tax you would owe to the US on that. So it sounds pretty complicated. I'm not gonna lie, it can be, but effectively what happens is as you're, filing your last tax return, and we'll get into those details in a little bit, what you normally do is you list out what are all the assets you own and what are your total liabilities that you're accountable for. And if your net worth is over 2 million, you are subject to this exit tax. Again, there's other conditions like not filing your last 5 years or having very high tax liability, but I think that the exit tax mostly impacts those that have a net worth of over 2 million. So total assets minus total liabilities, if it's over 2 million, and this threshold hasn't really changed in the last few years, if it's over that amount, then you are subject to exit tax. So the next steps you would take is you would look at all your assets, okay? Obviously, you can't really sell cash or anything like that, but you'd look at how many properties do you have? Do you have securities, stocks? Do you have pensions, etc.? So those items would then be effectively sold. You will look at what did you acquire these items for? What's the cost basis? So for properties, that's pretty easy, right? How much did you pay for a property? And then on the date that you renounce your US citizenship, how much was that property worth? And then any excess over the basis from that current fair market value of the date you renounce, that's considered taxable. Now this sounds pretty scary because you're like, well, that can be a lot of tax. It can be, but there is an annual exclusion, and this amount does change and does increase every year, thankfully. It's at this point a little over 800K, that means you can have over 800K of gains that is excluded from actually being taxed. So while it sounds scary, a lot of people that actually go through this exit tax process, thanks to the annual exclusion, end up not paying any actual tax. Of course, if you have like 10 million assets, this is a very different story, right? So if you do end up having to pay this exit tax, right, by selling off all your assets, you can expect, anywhere from ordinary income tax rates to long-term capital gains tax rates, which can be, anywhere from 0%, probably not, but upwards to 20%. Now, when you do go through the exit tax process, a couple things to watch out for is if you do have US pensions, if you have US retirement plans, because actually you can defer the taxation on these US retirement plans, the qualified ones. However, you have to notice that financial institution that's managing that retirement plan within 30 days of you renouncing your US citizenship. So if you don't plan accordingly and you wait until you file your tax return 1 year later, you could be in for a surprise and not be able to actually defer the taxation on some types of US retirement plans. So now that we covered the dreaded exit tax, where do we actually kind of report this information? Well, when you are renouncing your US citizenship, there's actually quite some steps to take. So as I mentioned, the first step is actually before renouncing, because you want to make sure that you've planned accordingly. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that you're tax compliant for the 5 years prior to renouncing. So what's normally recommended at this point is you find out you're a US citizen, or you find out you have to file US taxes, and you don't necessarily want to do that anymore, and so you think about renouncing. Just a tip here, don't go to your consulate and tell them the reason you're renouncing is taxes. That's definitely a red flag. But anyways, you think about it and you say, I don't want to do this. Well, unfortunately, you can't just get out of it. You should go through the streamlined filing compliance procedure. File your current year of taxes and the last 3 years. That totals 4 years of taxes. So now you're caught up for 4 years. Now you wait 1 more year and you file 1 more tax return. That's your 5th year. That's 5 years. Now you have 5 years of tax compliancy on the books with the IRS. After that, you can go ahead and renounce your US citizenship. I've heard some horror stories from, clients that the appointment times can take a really long time. I guess they're trying to delay it a little bit. But effectively, plan accordingly. You go ahead and you renounce your US citizenship, and then in the year you renounce, you need to file a dual status tax return. A dual status tax return is a tax return for someone that was a US tax resident, aka a US citizen, part of the year, and for the other part of the year, they were not. So basically, the date that you renounce US citizenship is that cutoff date. From January 1st, the day that you renounce US citizenship, you're filing Form 1040, reporting your worldwide income, but also being able to benefit from a lot of different tax deductions and, benefits that are for US citizens, such as the foreign earned income exclusion. And then after you renounce, that period until December 31st, you are filing Form 1040 NR. Now, keep in mind, when you are filing a dual status tax return, they do immediately strip some of your tax benefits. So some you still get to do on Form 1040, but you cannot use the standard deduction anymore. You cannot file as married filing jointly, and there's, a couple other restrictions that are there. In any case, now you have a tax return. Form 1040, worldwide income, 1040 NR, just US source income or effectively connected income would be on that. So inside of those 2 returns, which are created for that year, you also have Form 8854. And that is the form that says, I gave up US citizenship. This is the date I gave it up. These are my other citizenships. This is my net worth. This is me certifying that I was 5 years tax compliant. This is me certifying how much my tax liability was for the last 5 years. And this is me calculating if my net worth is over $2 million. And if it is, exit tax. If it's not, there's no exit tax. You just file that form. That's it. Now, with That goes to the 1040 portion. Now the 1040 NR portion, you're gonna have to attach a statement to end your tax residency. And it basically says the same thing. This is the date I renounce. This is where my new tax home is. This is the proof that I gave up US citizenship. See my certificate, of loss of nationality included with my return. So this dual status tax return is pretty complicated. We do support this on MyExpatTaxes. So if you just go in and you just let us know you gave up US citizenship, we'll automatically put you into dual status filing procedure and we'll help organize all your information. Because as I said, you have to figure out, what's your worldwide income for this period? What's your US source income for this period? Put it all together and make sure all the right documents are there. And then there's a couple other requirements of where to send this form and where to send that other form. Keep in mind, dual status returns cannot be e-filed. They must be paper mailed. If we could e-file for you, we gladly would, but the IRS does not allow a dual status tax return to be e-filed. This return must be paper mailed. It is just one last thing they do to you to annoy you. Probably not, but maybe. So that is the dual status tax return. It sounds really complex. It can be. But at MyExpatTaxes, we do so many dual status tax returns that we have a very standard procedure for it, and we'll make sure that it's as painless as possible for you. If you're doing it yourself, again, remember, you don't file just Form 1040. You need to file 1040, 1040 NR, you need to have Form 8854, and you need to have a statement to end tax residency. Otherwise, you are still on the hook to file these tax returns. When you have already now renounced your US citizenship, you have filed your dual status tax return, you can possibly go and celebrate. You have no more US tax reporting requirement. But maybe you still do actually, and that's the con. A lot of people will renounce US citizenship thinking that that's it, they're done. They don't have to file anymore. However, for those that still have US source assets, you are not off the hook. Now you get to file, until you give up all of your US source assets, a Form 1040 NR. And Form 1040 NR is for those without US tax residency, so US tax citizenship, non-green card holders, and those not physically living in the US. 1040 NR will make you report your US source income, such as rental income, dividend income, royalty income, pension income, etc. However, you don't get the standard deduction. You can't necessarily claim foreign tax credits on a lot of types of income. You don't get the foreign earned income exclusion. If you have US source dividends, guess what? You're paying at least a 15% tax rate on that for most countries, and you cannot claim foreign tax credits. So it can be that when you're a US citizen, it's annoying and you have to file these returns, but you don't end up owing any tax because of all the tax benefits for US citizens. However, when you switch over and you still have to file a US tax return for, one or two reasons, you end up actually owing tax. Most people that file a 1040 NR return will owe some type of tax to the US because there are almost no deductions to take advantage of. And when you are no longer a US citizen, things can get a little bit trickier. So for example, if you were entitled Social Security benefits, it might be a little harder to get those because as a US citizen, you can essentially live anywhere and still claim US Social Security benefits, except like North Korea or Cuba, okay? But it's just on hold. They don't actually take it away from you. You can claim it once you move out of those restricted countries. Now, if you're not a US citizen and you are entitled to Social Security benefits, things get a lot trickier. There's a lot of different tests that you have to pass. You might have to re-enter the US every 6 months. You have to make sure you're living in a country with a totalization treaty, etc., etc. So it's just a fair warning because I know a lot of people, they find out about their US tax obligations and they completely panic and say, I just need to get rid of my US citizenship. Do think about it a little bit more. It's a really important decision. Right? You obviously know that if you give up US citizenship, that means you can't easily go to the US. You can't easily work in the US. And I know maybe in this climate, you're saying, I don't ever want to go back, but I can't tell the future and you can't either. And for me, it's always, it's a good market to work in and it's a good market that maybe my children will want to work in, right? It's maybe one day I will want, a house there, my family still lives there, etc. And just giving up US citizenship, yes, there's these tax things related, but it's a lot of personal as well. So obviously I have to put that because it is a decision you need to take, you know, not lightly, and just don't think about the tax part. Now, again, I think if you've been following My Expat Taxes, if you heard me talk about different topics, if you haven't, check out our YouTube channel. There's a lot of information. We will help you make your US tax filing process easier. And if you're a US citizen, there's actually a lot of things you can benefit from, like contributing to US IRAs, Social Security, etc., etc. So it's not all bad. So anyways, I hope this video gave you a little bit more insight. Obviously, reach out to us, team@myexpattaxes.com. Let us help you in a more personalized way and don't make a decision based off of one YouTube video. I'm a US expat myself, and our goal at MyExpatTaxes is to make life simpler for our fellow expats. So subscribe for more clear, actionable tax tips for US expats all around the world.